They may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away.
That was the Episcopal Bishop of Washington yesterday at the National Cathedral, talking directly to the president, directly, eye to eye, about compassion, humility, kindness, honesty, honoring the inherent dignity of every person, talking to him about respect, about mercy. This is not his usual bailiwick. It is hers, though. Joining us now is the Right Reverend Marianne Edgar Budde. She's the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C. Bishop Budde, I really appreciate you making the time. I know you have a lot of options where to be, and I appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
What made you decide to make that appeal the way you did, to ask him for mercy in that way?
Well, as you summarized so well, as I was thinking about at the end, toward the end of my preparation, the pillars of unity, it struck me that I was missing one, and that last one was mercy, to have mercy and compassion. And rather than state it in sweeping terms, I thought I would acknowledge to the president, acknowledge that he had come to the highest office of the land, that he had millions of people had entrusted him with this power. And I wanted to make, as you heard, a plea, a request that he broaden his characterization of the people that are frightened now and are at risk of losing everything. And I thought that that would be the more respectful way to say it, and also to appeal to not only the president, but to all who might be listening, to appeal to what we know to be true about our immigrant neighbors, who they are, the kind of people that we're blessed to be among, and to remember them in our understanding of what it means to be America.
Your opportunity in that moment to minister directly to the president is a very unique moment. I know that you've been the bishop in Washington for a long time, and you were there for his first inaugural as well. But I wanted to ask about the broader question of the role of the church right now in moral leadership in this moment. We have seen the Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, elements of the Lutheran Church, other congregations all over the country, very diverse types of churches, offer themselves, for example, as sanctuaries for people who are facing deportation. What do you see as the role of the church in helping lead the public and helping us understand what our moral responsibilities are right now?
Right. That's a great question. I would say the first and primary role that we have is by example. You know, to take the teachings of our faith, to welcome the stranger, to love as we've been loved, to be compassionate, and to live that out in real terms with real people in our communities. So that's foundational. And then, when given the opportunity to speak and to be at times a conscience, at other times a consolation, to be present, ministering or pastoring the common good. And so it takes many forms. It depends on the moment. We're in a particularly harsh moment now when it comes to conversations around immigrant populations in our midst, and so that was the reason for the tone I took now. But it could have been a very different tone in a different context, depending on how compassion needs to be manifest in a given time.
Even before we had the sort of, you wouldn't use these terms, but I'll use it, sort of nasty reaction from the president in the overnight hours, in which he demanded an apology from you and insulted you in personal terms. Even before we got that reaction from him, a lot of people were describing what you did as brave And I wanted to get your reaction to that. I mean, as a high-ranking church leader who's been doing this job for a long time, I imagine that speaking in public isn't difficult to you and speaking on difficult truths isn't difficult for you. But what do you make of the fact that I think a lot of people are feeling, are seeing in you a form of courage that they hope they would have themselves? Well,
just a slight correction. I'm afraid every time I step into a pulpit, right? That really never goes away. Large or small, it doesn't matter. It's a huge responsibility, tremendous vocation, and how many people get that amount of time and uninterrupted speech, right? So it's a really big deal, and I take it very seriously every time. So yeah, I was nervous. I was scared. I think perhaps the reason why it had the effect that it did is because for a while now there has been very little public, there hasn't been much of a narrative outside of the narrative that the president has been describing, right? People have gone quiet or they've been ignored. And so this was a moment, and I had no idea who was paying attention. I mean, the inauguration was the day before. There weren't that many people in the cathedral. It wasn't crowded. It was a group of people who had gathered at his invitation, but it wasn't something that was in public discourse. And so I think in some ways that was perhaps the reason why it had the effect that it did. It is also an audacious thing to address anyone directly from the pulpit. I typically do that for weddings, when you talk to a couple. Do you know what I mean? At funerals, you talk to the family you're seeking to console. This was a service of prayer for unity for the country, but it was on the occasion of the inauguration of a president. And if you go back to other sermons in those moments, there's almost always a word to the president. So it wasn't unusual in that way. But in the particular moment we're in, it filled a space that hadn't been occupied for a while.
Bishop Budde, I'd like to just ask you one last question, and sure. I'll give you from the outset an opportunity to not answer this if you don't want to, because it's perhaps not fair of me. Right. But we did get that nastygram from the president in the middle of the night in which he did insult you and demand an apology. Yeah. And I know I've seen remarks that you made today that you've received a lot of not just invective but threats, including death threats over the course of today since that happened. And I would just ask if you wanted to respond either to the president or to the people who have wished you ill in response to this.
Well, I've had people wish me dead. I'm not sure they've threatened to kill me, but they seem to be pleased if I met my eternal destiny sooner rather than later. And I would simply say I was trying actually to encourage a different kind of conversation that you can certainly disagree with me. You can disagree what I've said or did. But could we as Americans and fellow children of God speak to one another with respect? I would offer the same to you. I would listen to your views and I would honor them, but we don't have to go to the highest extremes of contempt when we are in a position of disagreement. And I think if we could get that back as a country, we would go a long way in being able to work together to address the many problems that we face.
Well, at its best, no matter your religious faith or lack thereof, the ministry is both teaching and leading. Yeah. And that, I think, is why you're having such a strong reaction from so many Americans to what you did yesterday. And I am sorry for the vitriol and the negative reaction that you've had from some quarters, but I hope you know that there's a lot on the other side of that as well.
Thank you Reverend so much.
Marianne Budde, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, D.C. It's an honor to have you here. Come back anytime.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Donald Trump's administration has ordered federal diversity, equity, and inclusion employees to be placed on leave by today in an effort to demolish DEI initiatives across the federal government. Trump signed an executive order Monday ending what he calls radical and wasteful DEI programs in federal agencies. That means DEI-related offices and programs will be shuttered and all websites and social media accounts for such offices removed. The Trump administration is also requiring millions of federal employees to return to the office. It also has reshuffled positions within the U.S. Justice Department, or rather, Trump LLC, forcing the removal of at least 15 experienced career staffers across several divisions to posts considered to be less influential or focus more on immigration enforcement. One of these officials includes a senior counterintelligence attorney who played a key role in deciding to search Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence to retrieve the classified documents he illegally took home as part of that now shuttered federal investigation. Joining me now is Everett Kelly, national president of the American Federation of Government Employees, which is the largest union representing federal and D.C. government employees. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you.
This is the order. I'm holding it in my hand. This memo, we can put it up on screen. And it went to all heads and acting heads of departments and agencies, shuttering DEI offices and other things. What is the union's response going to be?
Well, first of all, I think that we have an obligation to educate the public as to what DEI really is, because, number one, it's not affirmative action as some might think. DEI is about making sure that, say, a veteran may have a handicap, an injury from the services, and come to work for the federal government. DEI would make sure that that veteran has I guess I would say the opportunity to work in a job, and they will place them in a position where they could accommodate that veteran and so that they can do that job. So DEI is about that and about providing services for workers. It's not about the color of a person's skin.
And it's not a quota program.
Let's
just be clear. It means that, and it also, I think, for a lot of conservatives, they believe DEI just means black people getting jobs. And so when they see a black person in any job, they say, oh, that person's a DEIer. They said it about the literal elected vice president of the United States.
Absolutely.
She wasn't hired. She was hired by the American people. 80 million Americans voted for her, but they can't see through her race and gender. So it isn't just about hiring black people and women, right? It's about disabled veterans being accommodated. It's veterans returning from wars are also under DEI.
Absolutely. And I see that as a veteran myself, right? Mm-hmm. I see this initiative as a direct impact and attack on veterans. Of the 2.2 million federal workers, 642,000 of those are veterans. And so this is, in my way of viewing this, is a direct attack against veterans as well. The misunderstanding of what DEI really is, it's on us to really educate the public as to what it really is all about.
So taking down the websites is one thing to make sure it's gone. I mean, again, what is going to be the response? Because you said this is 2 million some odd employees. Donald Trump is trying to obviously purge people in the civil service in the federal government, not the political appointees, but the people who usually transition from, administration to administration working in the civil service. He would like to purge them. The Project 2025 plan was to purge up to 50,000 career civil servants, replace those positions with Trump loyalists. Do you see this as sort of the first step in trying to do that, to purge civil servants and replace them with Trump fans?
Thank you, because so many people miss that. That's exactly what I see. Because, this administration told us exactly what they was planning on doing, right? And they're doing it. This is an attempt to take apolitical civil servants and make them political appointees, make them, loyal to the president of the United States and not necessarily the people of the United States nor the Constitution.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to play a clip from J.D. Vance, who's now the vice president of the United States. He was on a show called Jack Murphy Live in September of 2021. This was the advice he gave Donald Trump.
I think that what Trump should do, like if I was giving him one piece of advice, fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state, replace them with our people. And when the courts, because you will get taken to court, and then when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it.
Andrew Jackson, who did the Trail of Tears, is interesting that he quoted him. One of the people who's now been subjected to what J.D. Vance wanted Donald Trump to do is a senior career official named George Toscas. He was a senior counterintelligence attorney who played a role in deciding to search Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence to retrieve the classified documents. He's seen everything in both counterterrorism and counterintelligence, said a former colleague in the National Security Division. There's no one in the department who knows as much about prosecuting and investigating terrorists and spies than George Toscas. His new job will be in the Office of Sanctuary Cities Enforcement in the Associate Attorney General's office. So moving him to a position in which he is not an expert to get him out of the position because Donald Trump is mad at him. What is the union going to do? What is your organization going to do about all this?
Well, the thing about it, we are expecting this administration to follow the law, to follow contracts if there's a contract issue, and if they don't, then we will litigate. That's what we plan on doing. This is about taking civil servants and make them political pawns. That's what this is all about. And again, I said from beginning of this election cycle that this president, that is now the president, want to make sure that he have civil servants that's loyal only to him and not the Constitution, not the American people. That's what this is all about. And I hope that the American people will realize that, it's not about nothing less than the loyalty to Donald Trump.
Yeah. I will know the National Treasury Employees Union said on Tuesday that it has already sued to block an executive order that would enable him to fire career federal workers across the government. So the lawsuits are already beginning. Everett Kelly, thank you very much.
Now, among those freed, Guy Reffitt. He's a militia member from Texas who was the first of the January 6 defendants to be convicted. Take a look. You see him in the black jacket wearing body armor and a helmet in a standoff with officers on the steps of the Capitol. Reffitt was carrying a loaded handgun, and he told people he wanted to physically drag Nancy Pelosi from the building. When he went home, he threatened his own children not to turn him in. But his son Jackson did anyway, and now he faces the reality that his father is free. Jackson Reffitt joins me now. Jackson, thank you so much for being here. I know this is not easy for you. And I know you previously said that Trump pardoning your dad terrified you. So I wonder what the last day and a half has been like for you.
Well, it's gotten worse. I mean, he's physically out now, and that is a reality that I haven't really faced yet. I thought I had time to work with it and understand it and work with him at some point, but I don't have that time anymore. And the only thing I can do right now is sit around after a couple months of prepping and being safe and distancing myself and moving and buy a handgun and a rifle. I mean, that's the only thing I can do besides talk about it right now and, try to surround myself with good, healthy people and I guess just spectate what happens now. I have nothing else to do other than just to sit here and be paranoid and imagine what could happen.
What worries you the most? Because the idea that you've already moved, that you felt the need to buy a handgun, tells us a lot about how afraid you are.
Yeah, it's on my waist 24/7 now. I have to make these calls early. I bought the handgun November 25th, right before midnight, and I just can't. I can't imagine being safe right now. It goes far beyond my dad. There are people out there that I get death threats by the minute now. I mean, people feel so validated right now with President Trump stepping into office and saying and doing all this and defending all these horrible actions. I mean, I saw a photo of my father today sitting next to the leader of the Oath Keepers, and the final hearing, his final testimony, I remember him saying that he was not going to be involved in this anymore. And as ignorant as I was then to actually believe that, I'm so heartbroken right now to see imagery like that and to see him continue down this path. And I think that goes for everyone pardoned. These people are willing to do this even though Trump never knew they existed. And now they feel his presence, and Trump has reached his hand out and helped these people out. And the validation, it can be deadly for others.
Do you know anything about where your dad is? Has he ever throughout this tried to contact you?
We've tried to contact each other. It's been very hard. He bounces around, and it's been hard for me to find the courage to reach out. I've seen him get further radicalized in prison throughout these years, and there had been a point whenever I figured that he had gotten better, And that is not the case. He has continued to reach out to these far-right militias, and he's continued to participate in and downplay and justify his actions and not face accountability. I want the best for my dad. I advocated for mental health help in prison, and he denied it, from what I heard. He absolutely denied it, and that was heartbreaking to hear. All he needed was some therapy and some people to talk to that aren't just going to validate him, because that's what happened on January 6th. That's what led him up those stairs, was validation. And he's going to get more of that than ever.
When you were growing up, Jackson, was he a dad much like any other dad? Because I think a lot of people have a question about, how do you get to this place? How do you get to the place where you're willing to go to the Capitol and you're willing to go to prison?
I think he was an amazing father growing up. He gave me so many opportunities, and he raised me to be the man I am right now. The only thing I can imagine that led him up those stairs was, being scared. I mean, we live in a rough capitalist country that atomizes people. And whenever you find that community and that calling to save your family, that you think is to save your family, and you're just being used by some guy who never knew you existed until he, saw you get in charge with nearly 8 years. I understand why my dad did it. He wanted to protect his family, but that led him astray, and it was so hard to see him take that decision. I informed authorities prior, but he took every action afterwards that led him to where he is now, and he's going to keep taking those decisions. He's not stopped, and that's what makes me so upset and scared.
Well, Jackson, I think it's incredibly brave of you to come on and speak your truth and take the time with us, and we wish you safety. And we wish you peace, and perhaps sometime in the near future we can check in and see how you're doing. Thanks for being with us. We do appreciate it, and we wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you.
Joining us now, U.S. Senator from Illinois, Tammy Duckworth. She is a member of the Armed Services Committee, which voted on party lines Monday to send Hegseth's nomination to the Senate floor. Republicans sent him, not Democrats. This new allegation, are you hearing any talk among the committee or maybe some of your Republican colleagues that this does, in fact, make them uncomfortable?
Well, they're not admitting to it out loud. And in fact, they are trying to shove through his confirmation as quickly as possible before more news can break of more allegations and more affidavits coming forward that speak to how unfit he is to be Secretary of Defense. And this is the problem. The Trump administration, when they requested the FBI background check on him, only requested a partial check, and they've refused to even share that report with the Democrats on the committee. And now they're trying to shove through his confirmation without even further, looking into these allegations.
Why are you? Is there one reason above others that you're a hard no for Hegseth? Is it these allegations? What is it for you?
Well, he's just not qualified for the job. I mean, bottom line, he spoke at length about how he didn't want to lower the standards in the military to allow women to serve fully in combat. And yet he wants us to lower the standards for him. He's only ever led more than 200 people or fewer. The largest budget he was ever in charge of was $18 million. I asked him if he'd ever supervise an audit, because one of the things that's happening within the Department of Defense is they've never passed an audit successfully, and he has never passed an audit or led an audit. And in fact, he so badly mangled one of the organizations he led, they had to bring in a forensic accountant to figure out what the heck he did with the $10 million budget they had. And now he wants to lead the Pentagon, which has a budget of over $850 billion. I mean, he's just not qualified. I asked him very simple questions about, what type of international negotiations would you have to engage in as a Secretary of Defense? And he couldn't answer that. And he's going to have to lead. He's going to have to go toe to toe with the Secretary of Defense of the People's Republic of China, and he won't be able to stand up to them. So he's just on the merits of doing the job. He's not qualified, let alone all these allegations of passing out while, drunk in uniform, going to strip joints in uniform, having to be carried out of bars. No soldier would ever get promoted with those types of behaviors on the record. And yet my Republican colleagues seem to think that's okay for somebody who wants to be Secretary of Defense.
Joni Ernst was just asked about this, and we don't have the sound loaded, but I can tell you what she said. She said it's really hard to buy into the affidavit, the sworn statement from the former sister-in-law, when the ex-wife also swore that it did not happen. So it sounds like this is not going to sway her vote. She was somebody that people were looking toward because, she's a veteran. She's also been the victim of abuse. Do you know why Joni Ernst would not be swayed by this, or why she's, just take the allegations out of it, why she would get behind somebody like Pete Hegseth?
Well, let's just start off by saying that the ex-wife did not swear that it did happen. There was a statement that came out from her lawyers. Remember that this ex-wife is dependent on Mr. Hegseth for child support, and that she has very young children, and she has expressed deep fear of him in the past. And so if you look at what she has said or what her lawyers have said, they're very carefully made statements. And so at no point has she swore that this has never happened. So let's be clear about that. I think that Joni Ernst, when she came out and said initially that she had some concerns about Pete Hegseth, immediately was flooded with attacks from the MAGA far right-wing crowd, so much so. I mean, and even highest levels of the Trump administration, those closest to President Trump, said everything from you will never win re-election, you will be primary, so much so that she, not long after that, surprisingly came out and said, I don't actually have any reservations anymore. I think this is all about people buckling under to Donald Trump. And it is really quite sad because this is about the operational readiness of our United States military. This is about the men and women who wear the uniform of this great nation, and us having here in the Senate the responsibility to ensure that they are safeguarded and supported when we ask them to go out and do the most difficult job possible, which is defending our freedom and our liberties.
Yeah, it has been a lot of pressure from Donald Trump and his allies. Senator Tammy Duckworth, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate having you.
Thank you.
With us now, NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, Washington Post national political reporter Sabrina Rodriguez, and former Ohio Governor John Kasich, who is now an MSNBC political analyst. Julia, Tom Homan saying that 308 serious criminals were arrested in the last 24 hours. Are these the massive raids that have been announced?
Well, Jose, just to put that in context, I had my producer pull a given month in the last year. They looked at September of 2024. And look, over those days, the highest day that they arrested was about 242 migrants in a given day. So 308 does seem to be a surge. But is it the shock and awe that the Trump administration promised? It doesn't seem to have the details, at least, that we were expecting. We were expecting this to target major metropolitan areas. We don't know the when, we don't know the where or the who. We just know these numbers as they're rolling them out. So what it looks like, and we've reported that this was likely, is that ICE would continue to do their operations. They would surge more resources and do more operations in the very early days of the Trump administration, and they would talk about it. But it's important to realize those numbers aren't necessarily dramatically higher than what we saw in the previous administration. And it may be very hard for them to reach that goal of millions and millions in a year simply because they don't have the funding yet, Jose.
On the other hand, Julia, precisely the fact that we don't know when, where, and who is what the administration is looking for to have a surprise factor.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they definitely called off those plans in Chicago that we and others reported were going to start on Tuesday morning when those plans started to leak. They want the surprise. And of course, every law enforcement operation wants the surprise because they want to be able to arrest people who don't know they're coming. They don't want them to hide. They don't want them to be armed. That is obviously something a lot of law enforcement organizations would do. And then you have this memo that you're talking about from the Justice Department, where they're saying that it is illegal for anyone to impede an immigration officer, a state and local police officer, and that they are willing to look at potential prosecution if any of those state and local officers get in their way. It's important to remember sanctuary city police officers aren't ever standing in the way of ICE, barricading the door when they're trying to arrest an immigrant. What they aren't doing is they're not picking up the phone and calling ICE when they have an undocumented immigrant that they've encountered in their operations. So it's going to be interesting to see how this memo gets interpreted and how exactly these people could be referred for prosecution and based on what behavior.
Sabrina, I know you've been very focused on this reporting in the last couple of days. What reaction are you hearing from people you're speaking to?
Right now, there's sort of this question of uncertainty of how far is this going to go, how wide-reaching this is going to be from the Trump administration. You know, we saw Trump on the campaign trail really tout. This was the centerpiece of his campaign, talking about how he was going to execute this large deportation effort. But I think for a lot of people, there's still not a full understanding of what that entails, what that looks like. For some people, that definition means, oh, no, he's not actually going to deport all the millions of people that he said. He's really going to just focus on criminals. For some, it's, oh, criminals and people that are taking advantage of government assistance. And for others, it is this perception of, oh, no, he needs to get rid of everyone who is here undocumented, who crossed the border or came illegally. So I think in the days to come, really, it's going to see how this sinks in with the American public when they start to see really that imagery come out. But I think depending on who you voted for and where you stand politically, right now, it's sort of people are in their corners and sort of set in their beliefs of what this is going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, Governor, it does indeed seem that there are political reactions to it, depending on the prism from which they're seeing it. And a recent New York Times poll found that 55% of Americans support deporting all immigrants in the U.S. illegally. How do you see this, Governor?
Well, I think Sabrina said it right. It depends what the images are, Jose. Look, I don't know any American or very few Americans who would say that if somebody is here illegally and they have a criminal record, they ought to be picked up and deported. I think there's great unanimity around that. But if all of a sudden we have, raids in churches or in schools, which is they're now saying they could possibly do, those kind of images, in my opinion, Jose, they will not stand up. It's about a pendulum. It is about the border. Frankly, I think the Democrats were too lax on that, and the Republicans are saying we're going to strengthen the border and we're going to deal with this problem, particularly with people who are criminals, and the pendulum's going to come back. But I also want to tell you that yesterday I was very affected by the sermon by I think she was a bishop in the church where Trump attended, and tried to remind him that, these people who are here, you look into their face, you see the face of God. And we need to be merciful and we need to be just in the way we go about it. And so I think that if that pendulum gets swung from too lax to way too firm and people being yanked out of certain places, I think the public will not like that. And I think that will be cause for activism. I think this could be an era of activism where people say from the bottom up, no, that is not fair, that is not just, that's not my country. But as Sabrina said, we don't know yet. It's too early. And so I don't want to prejudge it. We just have to see how this all rolls out, in my opinion, Jose.
Yeah, that was Bishop Buddy at the National Cathedral. Julie, I know you were able to get a firsthand look at one of the final deportation flights of the Biden administration. What did you learn?
Yeah, that's right. I think it was really important to be able to see that. I mean, I saw a plane that was being filled with over 100 people going back to Honduras, including some little children. Now, we don't know if these people crossed recently or if they had been there for a long time. It probably ran the gamut. But it's important to realize the Biden administration didn't talk about this as much, but they did do deportations. And often, as we mentioned, those numbers could be over 200 arrests in a given day. Here's what the field office director, Miguel Vergara, told me about these people who were boarding this plane here. This was last Friday in Harlingen, Texas.
What we're seeing here, this is the final journey. Every individual is getting in this plane, or that we boarded in the plane, had their day before an immigration judge. The case was heard. They had their due process. Every possible remedy that could have been applied, or it was exhausted. And it was determined by an immigration judge that they don't have a right to remain in the United States.
And the context there, Jose, is so important because he's talking about how long it takes to get to the process where they can arrest and deport them. Trump can do a lot through these executive orders, but these people are still given the right to due process. And so just because someone is arrested doesn't necessarily mean that they've exhausted all of their remedies and they'll automatically be deported. They could be detained for a long time. It's an expensive process, and we have over 8 million migrants who are not detained in this country. So it's a big challenge if they want to take this on and to try to have some kind of results on it.
And Julia, I mean, there are also more than 1 million people in the United States with deportation orders that have not left the country. That's also a different group because their case has been adjudicated.
That's right. That's right, Jose. And I often hear that being described as the low-hanging fruit. Those are the people they want to go after because they can remove them from the country more quickly. I've sat in those immigration courtrooms before. A judge will say you were ordered deported, but it doesn't look like they just get arrested and put on the plane after that. Most of the time they walk out. And if they're found to be in the United States in violation of that order, of course, that is a felony and they are then arrested and deported right away. But it just gets into why this is so complicated and why so many people scratch their heads about why people are living in this country illegally. The system is broken. There are more people than they can handle. Trump wants to tackle this. We'll see if the tactics he takes on resonate with the American people, as the governor was saying.
Yeah, I mean, Sabrina, you spoke with a Latino family in Arizona who support Donald Trump. What is their story and what do they say?
We just published this first part of a series that's looking at this family, the Ramirez family in Phoenix, Arizona. And this family, all four of them, they have 2 college-age sons, the 2 parents, both immigrants from Mexico that all voted for Donald Trump. And it was interesting to talk to them because you sort of hear them talking through what we're talking through right now, this uncertainty of what exactly it is that it's going to look like. They feel that, yes, the immigration has gotten out of hand, that the amount of people coming, across the border is too much, that, people need to be following the law. But at the same time, there's sort of this uncertainty. OK, well, I think he's going to focus on criminals. Oh, well, actually, there's a really good chance that he may get some of the good people as well. And that is unfortunate. And sort of them grappling with the reality of that it is very hard for Trump to, if you believe that Trump is only going to focus on criminals, that is also very difficult to just squarely do. And I think for this family, as a family of immigrants, as a very proudly Mexican family, we're seeing them grapple with their evolving feelings on immigration, their evolving feelings on being American. And I think for a lot of Latinos, that is something that people are going to be feeling and thinking about in the months to come as Trump, continues to refer to immigrants the way he does and actually gets to now execute on the plans he campaigned on.
John, just in the next hour, the House is going to meet to take up the Lincoln-Riley Act, which passed the Senate yesterday, the bill named after a woman who was killed by an undocumented migrant. It would allow ICE to arrest and detain undocumented migrants charged with crimes. What does it mean for this to be possibly the first bill that President Trump will be signing?
Well, I mean, it's part of his big agenda. And, he said, I don't think this was right, that immigration was a bigger issue. The border was a bigger issue than inflation. I mean, both of them were big issues. So it's one of his top things. What I will say in listening here is, Jose, there are a lot of people that waited in line and they got in here properly, who are people who came in and went through the system. If you don't go through the system and you go to a judge and the judge says, no, you shouldn't be here because you came in illegally, that's a legitimate question. And you have 1 million people who were viewed that way. Well, I mean, what's fair is fair. At the same time, Jose, this bill that's going to pass or whatever, we need a complete immigration reform bill. None of this can be fixed just by a president putting something out around the border or with ICE or whatever. We need a comprehensive immigration reform bill because there are a number of business people in this country that want to see an effective guest worker program. They want to see, there are a number of business people. Look at the fight inside the Trump about the HB1 visas, So we need to sort this out. And it would be a great opportunity for a president to bring both parties together to do that. I just hope the water is not so poisoned that it can't be done. Because you and I both have followed this for a long time. That's a way to fix it.
Now, the lawsuits that we mentioned filed by these attorneys general argue that citizenship for people born in the U.S. is automatic, protected under the 14th Amendment. And the president alone cannot change that. Roughly 24 states have now filed suit. You can see coast to coast here, including Connecticut. And joining us is that state's Attorney General, William Tong. Thank you so much for taking the time. You called this new order a, quote, war on American families waged by a president with zero respect for our Constitution. Even if the law is on your side, the Constitution is on your side, what do you see as the consequences of the president, in your words, waging this war?
So he's attacking American families and who we are as a people. So many of us, Anna, are rooted in this country, tied to this country by right of our birth, like me. My parents were not citizens when I was born, and I was born an American citizen, the first in my immediate family, because I was born on American soil in Hartford Hospital in Hartford, Connecticut. So many millions of Americans, not just a few of us, millions of Americans reflect this beauty of our country, which Ronald Reagan said was one of the greatest strengths of America, birthright citizenship. And this attack on the 14th Amendment, which isn't a statute, it's not a regulation, it's not a law that Congress wrote. It is in the Constitution, and the president cannot, by the stroke of a pen, amend the Constitution or cancel one of its provisions. The only way to change the Constitution is by constitutional amendment and ratification of the states, and he can't do it by himself.
You mentioned your own personal story. How are you feeling personally in this moment?
I feel very tied to the 7,400 babies that are going to be born in Connecticut this year, whose citizenship is now at risk. I worry about what happens to them if they have no status. I mean, there's nothing in this order that tells us what happens to these babies. If they're not Americans at birth, who do they belong to? Are they stateless? And then what about their parents, even if they have a complicated immigration story, right? What will they do about health care for their kids? Will they be worried to go to the hospital? Will they be worried to call the police, to call 911 if something happens in their home? What will they do about their education? What about housing? What about their parents' jobs? Will they sign a lease? Will they continue in their job? Will they continue to run a small business that they've been building, like my parents? There's no way we're doing this interview, Anna, if I didn't have citizenship at my birth. It's because of that fact that my parents knew they could put everything into me and my sisters. And that's why I had the opportunities that I've had and the chance ultimately get a job, become a lawyer, run for office, be Attorney General.
How long do you think this legal fight could play out?
We hope it's quick, because the havoc and the chaos that this president is bringing to immigrant families is happening right now, even before it takes effect in 30 days. What we're most concerned about is people are making decisions now. Babies are going to be born now. They're being born now. They're going to be born in 31 days. And people have to make decisions about their lives and how they're going to respond.
Now, something like 12,000 babies who get that birthright citizenship are born every month, according to the lawsuits and what you have written. Now, we've learned a new memo from the acting Deputy Attorney General ordering the Department of Justice to help Homeland Security locate people in the U.S. illegally and even, listen to this, even investigate for potential prosecution state and local officials who resist deportations or impede federal authorities. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, my reaction is this is more bluster and intimidation and trying to force us and compel us to do their will. And Connecticut has never quit on people. We're never going to surrender, and I am never going to back down. So they can say whatever they want. Here's the bottom line. The 14th Amendment protects birthright citizenship, period, full stop, by its very terms. If Justice Gorsuch were sitting here right now, I would say to him, read the language, sir. It's very clear in black and white. If you're an originalist, if you're a textualist, it's beyond clear. And the fact is that immigration is the federal government's responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the states. We delegated that authority to the federal government, and they have no right to come into our states and tell state officials like me and state and local police what to do. Do your job.
Connecticut Attorney General William Tong, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Anna.